Two tradition-rich programs, and we start with Tony Rico's Firecrackers. Starting in 1990, they had to fight off a loss. They are 6-1 overall.
The core principle of success in this organization are the cultures that you build.
We love talking softball with him, not only his beliefs in the sport, but his leadership to these young women.
There would be no strength to the name across their chest if not for the pioneers all the way back to the 1990s.
But a lot of respect in that dugout, a lot of history right there before their eyes. And she swings that time to the middle of the dive, and appropriate that it ends that way. And out in the air, the gloves fly in the air. And for Tony Rico and the Firecrackers, it's a national championship. PGF National Championship belongs to Firecrackers Rico, led by Brooke Vestal. Congratulations.
Girls on your team are from all across the country. How do they find unity with each other to win championships like today?
You know, we try to teach this to all of our teams. When you build a culture and you treat people to respect each other, things fall in place and the stuff on the field happens a lot easier than you think. So it's about building a culture.
Congratulations again. Back to you, Darren.
Thank you.
Over 10 years ago, sports journalist and softball enthusiast Brent Eads visited the Firecracker softball headquarters in Huntington Beach, California. There he would meet softball coach and Firecracker president Tony Rico, a coach who then led the way in mindset and behavior in the sport. Now, 10 years later, after winning 3 national championships, a USA Junior World Championship, and overseeing the growth and transformation of the Firecracker name spread all across the United States of America, FC President Tony Rico invited Brent to come back to California to sit down and discuss the history, the legacy, and the culture that defines the Firecracker softball brand today.
Tony,
Brent?
let's talk about the very beginning. Let's talk about your background. Your parents were very influential. Your dad was a World War II vet. Let's talk about your upbringing, your sports, and how that dynamic played out.
I guess it's hard not to capture that part of the story because it has such a strong influence on what we do with the Firecrackers. So it's not an uncommon story, just a real humble beginning. We didn't know what we didn't have growing up. You know, we didn't have a lot of extra luxuries or anything like that, but yet we had everything that we needed. So I just had a really strong foundational upbringing of happiness, respect, the family unit. There were certain ways that we treated our brothers and sisters, and there are certain things we just never did. So in my household, everything was very solid. Not a lot of business ambition talk, not a lot of college talk. It really wasn't, there wasn't a lot of it as far as our family goes. But the family unit was extremely important, which I think you see in certain cultures. And so that really helped build the cultural base for the Firecrackers. The area that I grew up in, which is at Bellflower, outside of my house is where the influences were a little bit different. So it was really important to me later on in life that I understood where I came from. I didn't understand it growing up. That foundation that I was given by my parents really helped prepare me for all the ups and downs that I was going to experience later on in life.
In your office, you have a flag. You have pictures of your dad, a World War II vet. Obviously, the military has played a significant role in your life, but your dad's influence, probably your hero, I would think, in many ways. Talk about what he meant to you and the father figure that he literally was.
Well, I tell people I'm the son of a soldier. So I grew up with that understanding of what it was like to respect America, the freedom, you know, the cliche type sayings now, but we grew up in that household. So we had an English-speaking household with 2 Hispanic parents. My dad came back from World War II telling my mother that we're going to speak English in this house. I fought for the flag. My brother died for the flag, and we are Americans first. Later, the story started to unfold, but I started to realize what he did to come back, raise a family, provide for us the way he did. We were unaware of any hardship or any type of emotional difficulties that he had because of his experiences. So that was a big part of my upbringing, and how that affected the Firecrackers is that we always make sure that we talk about Memorial Day, Veterans Day, 4th of July, you know, the concepts of the bigger picture of the country, and that's something that we always supplement our teaching with.
It would seem that that has played a part in your philosophies, because I know we've had a conversation before that you said, I want to take my teams to some place at nationals and and experience history. I know one time I believe you said we were going to go to Gettysburg or go to Mount Vernon or something like that. Do you think that came from your father and his sense of history and, the patriotism, that type of thing?
Probably subconsciously. I've always looked at it as I don't take this game too personally. So we may be in a particular part of the country vying for a championship, doing this or that, a showcase, but really, where are we? And what has taken place in this part of the country? First trip to Georgia through softball, that was the first time I had ever been to Georgia. So you realize the Kennesaw battlefield is right there just outside of Atlanta. We take the team there. You read the plaques. You're standing there. And I don't think you're able to not experience a feeling of what took place there. And so that was an important takeaway for our teams, is that wherever we went, whatever happened historically, we were going to find something, and that was going to be able to be part of our experience as well.
Awesome. Your dad also was an athlete, played baseball and other sports. Talk about how that memory resonated with you and continued down to you being a baseball player.
Never talked about it. My dad was in his 40s when I was born, and he was a man's man, didn't talk a lot, didn't sit me on his knee and tell me a lot of things. But I became aware of that later on through pictures and different things like that. We had a natural athleticism in our family, and I'm sure it was both of our parents. And so he was very successful as far as what he was able to do on the ball field. He had opportunities in football and baseball to continue past high school, but he was drafted his senior year of his high school year into World War II. So those opportunities disappeared. He never told us about it. Never lived through me, never, I want you to do what I was never able to do. Never anything like that. Later on, I think the only thing he really told me was my first year of football, because I hadn't played until I entered high school, is he told me two things. He said, remember this in football, whatever happens on the first play, those players are going to remember for the rest of the game. So send a message. And the other one, he said, son, he goes, I was all CIF when CIF was from Santa Barbara to San Diego. So there were in all these different division schools. And just giving, that was probably one of the only statements he made that says, I was pretty good at what I did.
So you play baseball. Let's talk about your career. How did you progress in baseball, Little League up? Did you go very far? What did you do?
I'm the fifth child. I was the baby of the family. And I was, from the time I woke up, I think I was just running around. I was a little crazy kid and boundary tester, jumping off of roofs, doing anything I could. And I don't know where the love of baseball came, probably around 4 or 5 years old. Not because it was promoted in our family. I didn't have brothers that played sports, anything like that, but I just fell in love with the game. Probably watching TV, watching the Dodgers, different things like that. I can tell you when I was 7 years old, I was looking in the sports page for the Dodger statistics because they didn't come out every day. You would get the box scores, but I always wanted to see the Dodger averages. So I remember looking in the sports page one day, and I was 7, and I looked in the corner of the sports page, and there was an ad for Little League signups. So I took the ad to my dad, and I asked him if I could sign up. And he was never emotional up or down or either way. He just kind of looked at me, and I was like, please, can I sign up? So he took me down, and I played Pee-wee, my 7-year-old, and went on through, a lot of great experiences. I was pretty fortunate on the ball field. I was able to play college ball, and then my last year I was able to play in Europe. I played a year in Holland, and that was in 1990. I was 25 years old. And that was really the summation of all of the teachings, all of the college teachings, my family background, everything. That was the one year that I felt like I understood things at a professional level, and I put it all together. And so at 25 years old, it was my last playing year. And after that, I wanted to come back and I wanted to raise a family. And so I wanted to just emulate my dad's footsteps. I didn't want to be a ball player anymore. I didn't want what I called special treatment, people giving me things, acknowledging me for being whatever unique. I wanted to assimilate into a regular kind of lifestyle. I wanted to get a job. I wanted to get married. I wanted to have insurance. I wanted to have retirement and just provide. I saw my dad come home every Thursday and throw the check on the kitchen table. And my mom would pick the check up and he says, your mom pays all the bills and whatever she has left after the bills, we might invite your family over for a party or whatever that. So I wanted to assimilate into that. So Jonathan was soon born after that. And, we started off on that road. I did not intend on ending up back in the softball world.
Yeah, I was going to say, how do you make the jump from baseball to softball? You don't have a daughter. You're not the daddy-daughter type.
It's a really good tie-in. So I no longer wanted to be part of the sports world. Again, you think you know what you want when you're younger. And I had did some batting instruction in my last year in college at Los Angeles State University, and I only had a couple of softball players. All my students were baseball players. And I had one young lady, her name was Robin Walker, and this gets into the first layer of Firecracker alumni. And she was 10 years old. She walked into the batting cage, and she just had a look of certainty in her eyes. She had a little pink tennis skirt on. She just came from a tennis lesson. And she was just looking at me. And so I just said to her, I didn't do it all the time. I said, so what are you going to do for a living someday? And Robin looked at me and said, I'm going to Stanford on a softball scholarship. And she was 10. So I looked at her, and my statement back to her was going to be, yeah, and I'm going to be the first Mexican president of the United States. But just as I started, I remember this so clear, as it was going to come out of my mouth, I looked at her, and she was looking at me like, say it. Tell me that I'm not going to go to Stanford on a softball scholarship or something. And I didn't say what I was going to say. That, sarcasm, you're born with it, whatever you develop as a cynical coach. And now she's she's a little older now, in her 30s, and she has a double doctorate in jurisprudence from Stanford. She was on her first Firecracker team that went on. She went on to play for the Gordon's Panthers, got her scholarship to Stanford, and she's doing very well. So Robin Walker's dad, after I came back from playing ball in Europe in 1990, and I was going to assimilate into this regular lifestyle, I was working construction. Robin Walker's dad calls every Rico in the phone book until he gets a hold of my mom. And so he calls my mom, and my mom calls me and tells me, this Wayne Walker's asking for you. And I was like, okay. So at that point, it's like, Tony Rico's not known for being real responsive on the phone, even at that age. So, all right. So I didn't call him back. So she calls me back 2 weeks later and said, he's called a few times and said he's going to continue to call until you call him back. He wants you to work with his daughter again. So I was like, just to get my mom off my back, I called Wayne Walker back. I said, what would you like? Please, will you work with my daughter one more time? The experience with the lessons was good, blah, blah, blah. So I was like, I was really adamant, Brent. I didn't want to do it. And I said, okay, I'll do one. I'll meet you somewhere. So I met him at Cypress Arnold Park and in Cypress. And it happened to be the California Cruisers they were playing on. And it was before the state tournament. And I want to say it was either 1991 or 1992. Could be either. And I didn't know what I was getting myself into. So I gave the lesson in the batting cage at the park, and some parents started sitting around the cage. So, all right. So I finished the lesson, got to go to my car and get the heck out of there, whatever cash I was going to get. And Gene Tomoguchi, who was the coach of the Cruisers, who I have to also give him credit for being one of the first bricks of this whole story, waited for me outside and asked me if I could give lessons to his daughter. And I said no. And so I guess he knew I was going to already say that. So he said, look, I've got 4 students, other players. He goes, I have a cage in my backyard. And he goes, one night a week, I'll give you 4 students. You can work with my daughter and X amount of dollars for you. And so now I'm doing the math of what I was making with a union job in 1990 or 91, and about $22 an hour, which was great for me back then. But now you're talking $25 a half an hour for a lesson, $50 an hour to go back and do something that I loved. So I said, sure, I'll do it one night a week. So now I'm in Irvine coaching some of the Cruiser kids. I met another gentleman named Dale Ogden, again, important part of the story. And he had met me either at Gene's house, and he said, hey, listen, I have a batting cage in my backyard as well. Would you like to pick up some extra lessons? He goes, might not be though, because it's a little far from Irvine. And I said, well, where is that? And he said, I live in Long Beach. Well, at that time, I was living in Long Beach with Jonathan's mother, Roxanne, and we were living there. So it was very proximate, very convenient. So it was in Long Beach at Dale Ogden's house that I started picking up a few more students, just a couple nights a week, extra income, and I met a gentleman named Gary Wardine.
So this is the beginning.
This is the beginning. Gary Wardine, that name is Plymouth Rock of Firecrackers. Gary Wardine at that time was playing, his daughter was playing on the Cruisers, and he had a vision. Gary Wardine to this day is one of the most intelligent men I've ever known, business-wise, family-wise, especially now in being able to catch back up with him after so many years. A role model, just amazing template of how to live a life. So I started working with his daughter, and he asked me if I would want to coach a team with him, come out and coach. So of course I shot him down right away, almost like got offended that he asked me. So persistence. Worked with his daughter 2 weeks later. He asked me again, and I think, as I remember, I was like, no, thank you though, but no, I'm not interested. Asked again. This time made a business proposal worth my time to watch a couple of games on a Saturday. So it made it worth my time. So I said, what the heck? Compare it to what I was working with or making in construction. And so here and I go watch, he'd started a Firecracker team, and I watched the first couple of games. And exciting, I mean, it was fast-paced. So all right, watched it, I was about to take off. But the team, after the second game, was not going to the parking lot like a doubleheader in baseball, which I was used to. They started to go to another field.
To practice?
No, to another game. They were in a tournament. So they were in an elimination bracket. They had won their first two, which I didn't know it was single elimination or anything, and they were going on to their third game. So I asked a couple of dads, I said, where are you guys going? He goes, we got another game. I said, he told me his first couple of games, and he said, yeah, first couple. And I said, well, how many will you play? And they said, well, it's 5 games to the championship. Now I'm doing this math as a baseball player. In Little League, we had 16 Little League games all season. We didn't have any winter ball. So you love baseball, you got 16 games all year, that was it. And these girls are playing 5 games in a day. That snapped right there. So then I asked one dad, how many games did your daughter play last year? He looks at another dad, looks back at me and says, about 130. And I went, what? I said, how many at-bats did your daughter get last year? He figured about 300. And that was the first time I ever told myself, I wish I was a girl. I wish I could experience what these girls started to do. At this time, I was still playing ball on Sundays with some guys I played college ball with. And so here I am out playing on Sundays, and now I'm starting to think, what are the Firecrackers doing? Still hadn't taken on the coaching role or anything like that, but they stuck in my head. The story of softball started to stick in my head. It was fast-paced. It was not boring. This team was actually really good and very energetic, and it's kind of like, why is a girl still in your head? Why is whatever's in your head? So I didn't understand that at first. And I didn't agree to coach. I told Gary, I'll come out and I'll work with your players, still real tentative, kind of 1 foot at a time. And I remember clearly, I figured I was going to play baseball or slow pitch until I was 75. There's a 75-year and older slow pitch league that you have to live long enough to play in. And that was my goal as a player. I went home after 1 game on a Sunday. I took off the spikes in my garage. There was nobody around me. I tied a knot in my spikes and I put them over a nail. And it just clicked in here that I was never going to play again. And that was really my identity, because on the field I was able to do things and whatever. It's like being a good musician. There's notoriety for that. Mm-hmm. Walked away. That was probably 1992, 1993. And here I am 30 years later. To fast forward, I got bit by the bug. I fell in love with the sport. I had a gentleman that understood me, Gary Wardine, to the fact that he didn't push the wrong buttons, because I was so quick to either martyr myself or just walk away from anything. I didn't understand how to use common sense. And so here we are. It's been a long road since.
So at that time, are you an assistant coach, or
Yeah.
is he handing you the reins?
Yeah, so I'm an assistant coach, but I'm developing players. So Gary was the admin mastermind, and he coached our first national championship game in 1994. He called the pitches. He was the third base coach, and he really allowed me to come into the landscape. And really, what my strengths were, I believe, at that point, was teaching the game. Teaching the hitting portion, the fielding, throwing, whatever it was, just being the next player. But the whole time I was starting to get an education on what travel ball really was. But he, from 1990 to 2002, he was the head coach of this team, and I was his assistant. And he allowed me to grow and develop under him.
Was there a big jump in terms of transferring what you knew in baseball and your expertise to softball? Did you have a learning curve that you had to
Big jump,
overcome?
but I didn't realize it because I thought I knew everything.
They always do.
And baseball players generally don't come into the softball world and go, oh, wow, I'm going to learn a lot here. They tend to come in because the nuances and history of baseball, and there's so much depth to that game. And at that point, softball was still developing. So, no, and there were a lot of things that I was teaching that I didn't see them doing. And so we figured, yeah, this is what we need to do. No, the jump didn't come till later because we had success early. Gary recruited a very good team. We won a national championship within 4 years, always placed well and did well until we got to 18 and under in 1996. That was the big change. So for the first 6 years, it was pretty good going.
So for you, with those 6 years, were you just a student watching, learning, applying your knowledge in baseball to softball? And where did the slapping, the small ball, and even we'll get into this more, the mental approach that you're well known for?
Again, I have a lot of trouble thinking about how I coached back then. Didn't know when to be quiet. Didn't know when to stop and give the kids their time. not so much a negative. I wouldn't react negatively, but I was very reactive. And there was a lot of energy. I'm the energy guy, so it was nonstop all the time, annoying as heck, I would say. And then getting into 18 and under, that was a different experience. So the mindset, there's two things, and you'd mentioned slapping, I'll get to that. In 1996, we came up to 18 under. We won nationals in 1994. 1995, great 16 under team. I'm under the illusion, why would anybody leave this? We got a great thing going, we're having success, but I didn't understand the business of softball. So Gary calls me in September of 1996, I believe, and we were going up to 18 and under, and he said, are you sitting down? I said, yes, and he said, good. He goes, they're gone. And I said, who's gone? He said, 9 out of our 14 players are gone. I had been told 2 months before that by a dad on our team, hey, Tony, I'm just giving you a heads up that a lot of kids on your team are talking to one of the top 18 and under organizations about leaving. And I dismissed this man because I knew everything. And I said, come on, Bob, they're not going to go anywhere. Why would they leave this? So now go back to the phone call. Gary tells me that the exodus has started one by one. They were doing exactly what they should have done. They were going to an established, accomplished, and the perfect place they had to be, the best 18 and club, or one of the 2 best 18 and under clubs in the country. So that was the first big education that we got, because now it's like nobody took our players, as I tell coaches, nobody takes your players, they choose to leave. So we had nothing. So it was, do you want to coach? Gary asked me, do we fold the team? What do you want to do? And I said, put a piece of paper, so it tells you how long ago it was. Put a piece of paper on a telephone pole and get us 9 bodies. And so that first year of learning how to recruit from the bottom, because now at 18, it doesn't matter what you did. We had a great reputation at the younger levels, which is why our players were desired and they were waiting for them. But there was no sign at all of what was going to happen. So now we start from the bottom. And so we're not on the top of the food chain. So we're back now at the bottom of the food chain. No expectations. It's not a lack of respect, just no respect for anything at 18 and under. So first couple years were tough, learning curve. Let's go to Mike Candrea, a great friend of mine, also a mentor. I've known him for a long time. He's really helped walk me through a lot of experiences in softball. And one of the greatest people in softball, will be always one of the greatest of all time. We're eliminated from nationals in 1998 or 1999. I'm standing in the outfield with him. We're watching the Clearwater Lady Bombers with Claire Sua and Jenny Gladding, and we're just watching one of the last games. And he says to me, hey, Tony, I want you to come to Arizona, and I want you to learn the slapping game from Amy Shellevold, who was a renowned slapper, a lot of success in the early 90s. And I looked at him and I said, Mike, if I've got to learn slapping to be successful at softball, I am effing going back to baseball.
Yeah,
Not really the way you should be talking to Mike Candrea, but I had this comfort level because we were, on a friend basis and stuff. And so Mike didn't even answer me. He just looked at the field. He looked straight ahead. We sat there about 3 seconds, and I said, okay, that was a little harsh. I said, why do I need to learn slapping? Because I know it all. And he looks at me and he goes, hey, you've already mastered 25th place, so if that's all you're shooting for, you don't need to learn anything.
He came back.
And he shot me right in the forehead, right? And to be honest with you, Brent, I like when somebody does that. Like, I appreciate the equal play or whatever it is. So I said, okay, nice one. I deserve that. No, seriously, tell me, why do I need to learn slapping? Because he was an ex-baseball guy too. And that's what he said. He goes, Tony, I was a baseball guy as well. You would think I've learned something. He was still winning. They in Arizona and UCLA were still in the national championship every year. And so he explained to me the value of slapping. So I did a clinic with him in the fall, and I spent some quality time with Amy Shellevold. I took her CD with me. I looked at the footage at the end of it, and I started to design kind of my own way of teaching it. And so I usually open up a slapping seminar with that conversation of where I was when I knew it all and I didn't need slapping. And that's just to let coaches know that, look, we all have a story and we can all learn things.
You didn't know what you didn't know.
Oh, gosh.
And then
I thought I did.
Well, my falling in love with softball as it exists even today is seeing that slapping put to use in, I believe it's a 2006 ASA Gold National Championship. I won't say the team, they were from Southern California, but I watched them just destroy, just 3-run homer everyone.
Yes.
And then you guys played them, and the infield was like the Keystone Cops. They were running in circles. They didn't know how to rotate. They didn't know the third baseman if she should come in, stay back. And I think it was Kaylee Ordondo and that was Megan Langenfeld's team, right?
And that was really one of the first teams that we had put together that really was able to win because of those components, understanding the success of at-bats and the constant pressure. So that started to come into play. But I think if we go back to the late 1990s, we had some great 18 and under teams. We started to get some players that were making a difference. So Lovey Jung, Linnea Monema. Erin Manahan was the first player on our team actually second player on our team that came on and went on to win a College World Series with Cal Berkeley. Linnea won one with Mike at Arizona. So we had some really key pioneer 18 and under players that came because that was the hardship time of 18 and under for us. So they took the beating. They, on the I-5 qualifiers, I mean, there were no bursts back then. I mean, they went for it. So they paid the price. That what we call blood equity, that's sweat equity. The first 18 and under teams in the late 1990s were the first ones to really establish the price paid for the foundation of our success. And it wasn't that they were finishing at a really high level at the end of nationals, but they were starting to understand what it took, and that type of foundation started to be built. We get into the 2000s, and I had always told Gary Wardyne, I never want to take this team. I like doing what I'm doing, but don't ever think that I'm going to manage this team because I see what you have to go through, and I just like to coach. So in 2002, we were in Oklahoma in Tulsa for nationals, and our first bracket game was against Monica Abbott in the Salinas Storm. So we lost 1-0. Oh, you'll always hear coaches say like, oh, we had them, or we had the winning run on, it didn't happen. Okay, so we lost 1-0 to Monica Abbott. And so usually the first game in the loser's bracket, especially if you lose first game in nationals, you're not facing a great team first game in the loser's bracket. Usually it's just other teams that you know. So our second game was against this team called the Southern Force with a coach named Jerry Glasgow. So, well, let's just say O2 barbecue, that phrase, well, we experienced that. And I think this is an important part of the story of the Firecrackers because it wasn't all upper echelon success. So we experienced the O2 barbecue. Jerry Glasgow at that point, because he's got a certain hitting style now, but it was this, show the bat, bring it back, and it was just making stuff happen. So we're done. Now we're on the plane coming back home. We had some discussions about, potential changes with the program and stuff, but I don't remember anything leading up to this. And Gary took his briefcase and he put it, sitting next to me on the plane, he put it on his lap. And we weren't about to land. I looked at him and I said, don't even think about giving me that briefcase. And he looked at me and he goes, then tell them that there's no more practice.
Jeez.
And I was like, oh man. So you talk about those situations where you have to grow up real fast. There was no time to be immature or anything because he hit me right here with the fact that I love these kids and we weren't going to tell them the Firecrackers are done. So I said, Gary, basically I said it like this, you hold my hand and wipe my nose and do everything I need to do because don't leave me alone with this because you know I am not a qualified admin guy. And he didn't say this, he was always very classy and I probably speaking for him, but he basically like, Tony, I know that. So, and in 2000, again, important brick, he had brought in Don Menard. So he was already scouting for the admin component of this. This is important for all of our coaches that listen to this, that there is no one person that can handle all of the responsibilities for softball. So no matter what your strengths are, there's going to be something that you're not good at that you need to supplement. So Gary initially bringing me in for the playing side of it and how I develop players. Gary also knowing that wasn't my strength, bringing in Don Menard in the year 2000 and bringing him over. So 2 years of kind of working with Don, Gary had padded that ground. So in 2002, I took over the program by myself. And so that was a scary year, making lineups, doing all those things, and making all the mistakes you need to make to figure out what you're doing. So
sink or swim at that point. But you did have someone in Don who could help you on the administrative side. So it wasn't you had to be all things to all people.
The machine was still going. The team was operating. And again, I still wasn't aware of the depth of the admin because Gary was so good in just taking care of business. So everything was in order. So there was nothing wrong. You didn't know, and Don was doing an amazing job. So, but I think it's not that the culture started to change. I think the brand started to maybe go to another level. You know, all the foundational stuff was there. The first 12 years was a very important part of the story. And we were just able to implement a couple things, and I'm sure the 12 years of experience of watching games kind of helped. So 2003, first year, I think our highest finish at 18 and under to that point might have been 17th. Don't quote me wrong if it was higher or lower, but it was something around there. Well, now we're in the winner's bracket final against Gary Hanning, first year that I'm coaching. So that's a different experience.
This is 2003?
This is 2003.
Your very first year?
In Oregon, yeah. First
As
year
a head coach, wow.
As a head coach.
Okay.
So, you know, thinking of some of those players, Kendra Singley, Stephanie Brown, Lauren Greer, Katie Garrick, like there's some great players, again, pioneer Firecrackers. And so we had just beat the Gordon's Panthers, who we needed to be able to beat a team like that to get where we're going. So I'm sitting in the dugout, writing the lineup for the next game, and I hear Bird behind me. And I turn around, and it's Tim Walton. And Tim Walton was coaching at Wichita State at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And well, Bird was the nickname for the Cerritos College program. We were Falcons, but our nickname was the Bird, and he played at Cerritos College as well. Kenny Gajewski played it at Cerritos College. So Tim was just acknowledging that a bird had done well, and he walked by me and he went like this, which was just a sign that, you know, of a ring. And it was almost like a fraternity, someone from the same fraternity. We didn't really know each other, but it just gave me this security. Here I am in this dugout. I'm kind of displaced. We're winning. We're going along in the bracket. I'm sitting there completely by myself. I wasn't uncomfortable, but it was different. And then he walked by, and it was almost like a voice from the past, the fraternity. And it just created a peace. Tim doesn't know this. And so now we get into now we go on to play the Shamrocks, and then we beat them, and then we get to the winner's bracket final against Gary Hanning. So the Batbuster winner's bracket final game, that first experience against Gary at that point was the first time, let's just say, it got real. And so for any coaches out there that got to experience facing Gary in a championship environment, the food chain is established immediately. The hierarchy is there, and you know where you're at. So how you play that is important. So we ended up losing to Lisa Dodd. And there were a couple of things that happened in that game, but I knew that we had earned some respect in that game. So that was 2003. And now we go up to starting to go back to Oklahoma for nationals, and we get to the 2006, 2007, which is where you and I met, and you had seen our slapping. So to kind of pick up back on that, now we have the slappers implemented. Now we're pushing buttons. Now we have what I call a suffocation type offense. So the exciting part of that was that there was no real boring spots in the lineup. And the whole thing was that your lefties can put the ball in play and put pressure on defenses against any pitcher. Why? Because if you have somebody throwing, 70 miles an hour, the lefties are just touching the ball. They're not trying to be so precise with their bat. So, we got to the national championship final against the Batbusters.
What I noticed in that series, and this is where I fell in love with not just slapping, but your team, but softball overall. My daughter had played rec ball, and she also played club, but at such a low level. She was playing club soccer and club softball at the same time. And I would go to these Riverside tournaments. We had a little daughter at the time. It'd be 110 degrees. She'd play right field, get no balls hit to her. It'd be 1-0 games, all pitching. And it was painful. And so when I got to see this ballet with slapping and the precision, and I remember watching the players analyze the defense. If the third baseman or the first baseman were charging hard, they would either bounce the ball or drive it past them. They had options. It would be like an option read offense. And so I was like, this is beautiful. This is ballet on the field. The other thing I remember from that was you lost, and we talked about this earlier. I wanted to interview you and the players, and you were taking forever out in center field in Oklahoma City. But I was stunned when I saw, and you were obviously having a team meeting, and at that time I didn't know if you were chewing out the players or if you're consoling them, having just lost. Then I see 3 or 4 players get up and walk away from the group, and everyone is sobbing. I'm thinking, wow, they must have taken that loss pretty hard. And afterwards, I found out what the real reason was, that this was a loving goodbye from these players from the players that would remain to the players who were graduated and moving on. And that really impacted me to that point. I remember that today thinking, this isn't just about winning. The Firecrackers are, as a brand, are about developing the player and the person. So right. I was exposed to that, and that was my first foray into seeing your philosophy about making it real for the kids, that no matter what happened on the field, your development as a person was more important. Was that something that you had built up and that had been implemented years before, or was it something that relatively new to the 2006 team that was just new at that point?
So again, it's not something I would recommend to coaches, because again, the post-game talk a lot of times becomes therapy and just a venting of frustrations. I didn't know what was happening, and whatever this is that comes out and imparting the experience, that just was happening naturally. So, you know, for me, when we're in the moment, 15 minutes feels like 2, half an hour feels like 5, an hour feels like 15 or 20. And if you're engaged with people, it's not that they're enduring something, they sit through, because I'm constantly feeling their response. You know, my son Jonathan, he grew up on the fields with me, you know, going to all the parks and different tournaments. And so there was always a life teaching in everything. One of the things I remember about him is him growing up on the field and at the park, he'd always be running around with the kids and going to the playground. But at the end of every tournament weekend, he would come for the talk. So no matter where I'd see, you always keep your eye on your kid where he's running around, but whenever we get, he would run over there and he would stand there and he would listen like the rest of the kids. And it was really interesting, because I would start to say to myself, I think he listens to me more like this than he does if I talk to him at home, because it's more of a dad. So it was interesting to watch that. All of that started taking place. And yeah, as I mentioned, that was our goodbye. We didn't have a banquet. And I knew the importance of people wanting to talk to our players, college coaches and things, but it was a transformation. We were sending them off. So we would, basically, your days of service here are done. And it was my way of acknowledging, maybe they attained their black belt from us, they were certified efficacy, whatever that had been attained, and now you walk off. But that scene was the recreation in my mind of the Lou Gehrig scene in Pride of the Yankees. So at the end, when he gives the speech, I'm the luckiest man on the face of the earth, and he turns around and he walks in the tunnel, that always hit me so hard growing up that I wanted to see if I could create that same emotional thing. Well, it did. That response that you said that you saw, and also what you just mentioned about the ballet part of watching our teams, I get bored extremely fast. Surprise, surprise. I'm impulsive. I get, you know, I'll drift away like a butterfly if there's chase a butterfly if I'm not being held down. So watching that was important to me, that there was an entertainment aspect to our team, that we were fun to watch, that we were expressive, and there was a behavior component. Again, never by design on paper. I didn't have that ability, but I knew that we needed to play the game in a way that was respectful to the game, but also, I don't care who it is. If you're watching, we should be worth you watching. I would never want to play a song or play a game and make somebody sit and watch something they don't want to watch. And so getting that response, the ballet, I love, because most softball people don't really use that term or this or that, but there is a grace and there's a rhythm to the game, and it's a beautiful watch. So I love that.
And I saw, having come from the rec background, the club background, that you had great athletes, that they could adjust on the fly. They had speed, they had smarts, they could put the ball in the dirt, they could drive it, they could adjust. And that's where I saw the defense floundering. It was, again, like compared to football, you take what the defense gives you. Right. And that's where I saw there's a strategy here. It's not the top of the order has a speed, middle order has a power, the bottom doesn't do anything. The bottom of the order, like you said, they could put the bat on the ball and make it happen.
I think a good point that I think of when you bring that up is, yeah, we were getting better athletes at that time. You know, those pioneers that I talked about from the late 90s and those names I mentioned, the Amy Miners, the Ashley Van Boxmeers, the Boschers, you know, coming up, all of those players leading up were creating something that people wanted to be part of. So now around 2000, gosh, I think of our 2004, 2005, 2006 team, Melissa Roth, these players coming in, it started to change. We were getting a more polished player. We were getting some better athletes. And they were seeing something that they wanted to be part of. We were never a recruiting organization. This was not a marketing thing where we call people and say, here's what we can do for you, here's what we can do for you. I've always believed in creating something that people want to be part of, and how far can we take this with that? So you started to see the transformation of the players, and that was a really important time for what we're doing.
Brent and Tony took a break from the conversation to go and look at the photos and memorabilia collected around the Firecracker headquarters over the last couple of decades. First, Tony took Brent to his office to discuss an important feature that he refers to as the Wall of Influence.
So I guess if we were going to call this something, it would be the Wall of Influence. So I sit at my desk every day here waiting for people to call, needing help. And so these are my principal reminders. So at the top of the shelf here, we start with my godfather's World War II hat. He passed away a few years ago, but he was in Battle of the Bulge. Obviously the price they paid. This is my dad's flag that sits there, and that's just always a reminder of the kind of dad he was, what he did for the country. But most of all, I remember my mom's dignity when they handed her the flag. It was that rough moment, but she sat there and she was very, very upright. A couple pictures here on the end. A picture of my dad back in the 40s when he was throwing a sidearm style, and he had some opportunities in sports that were never realized because of him being drafted into the war. So how many years later, a picture of me playing in Holland, almost the same kind of sidearm picture. And again, it's just almost like the bookend of like where his life might have mirrored mine a little bit. And then a family reunion picture up here that's just, again, I don't forget where I come from. Next one underneath here is the gold medal that we won with the junior world team in South Africa, in Cape Town, South Africa. So this was symbolic to me. This flag was in the dugout. When we first arrived there, it was the year of the Japanese tsunami. So the crowd was very partial to the Japanese players, and well, it was the first time I noticed that we weren't the favorite team. It was kind of the Americans. So this means a lot to me because I kept talking to the kids about respect in the hotel and respect to all the other teams. When we won the championship, 3,000 to 4,000 people stood up and gave us a standing, moderate ovation, but it was an ovation of approval, and it was really important because they weren't going to give it to us if we didn't earn it. So that was a kind of a softball political moment that was very powerful, and then coaching with Karen Johns was amazing. This I show, and I talk to coaches and players about. I ask them if this looks like a peaceful or a stressful picture, and they said peaceful, and a peaceful moment. I said, well, this was before a semifinal game in Colorado. Everyone's asking if you're going to win it again. I think we had won it 7 years in a row. And this is our pregame. So this was before a big game against Scott Smith's Texas Bombers. And I just try to show people that it's not about how hard you're working, how many swings you're taking, how intense you are. Just get in the moment and think about what you're going to do, especially this picture right here. So this is ultimately the piece I want every player to find, in the crisis moments. I wouldn't say the most important, but right as important as anything, my mom's recipe for a happy household. So after she had passed, my niece, who she gave this to on a piece of paper when my niece bought her first house, my mom gave her recipe for a happy household, and then our niece gave us a copy of it, all of us, for Christmas, for a Christmas gift after the first year that my mom passed away. So 2 heaping cups of patience, 2 handfuls of generosity, 1 heart full of love, a dash of laughter, 1 handful of understanding, sprinkle generously with kindness, add plenty of faith, mix well, spread over a period of a lifetime, and serve everyone you meet. And my mom did that till our last day, and I tell everybody that definitely works. Going to kick to the right a little bit here. This was a passage written by Lauren Chamberlain that absolutely amazed me. And a lot of times when I have a young lady in here and she's vulnerable and we're going through a tough time, we want to go through the realization of how I talk about we're going to wash all the tough stuff off, we're going to shine you up, and then get in touch with your new self. So Lauren wrote this passage that I have the players read sentence by sentence. The most powerful line for me, basically, you decide what emotions you experience. It's taking responsibility for yourself, aligning your thoughts with an end goal in mind so that you can make anything that you want happen. The profoundness of this passage isn't what Lauren is known for, and that's why to me it was so special. And then the last one is, people wouldn't realize why I have a still of, and actually this was a gift given to me, which I thought it was amazing, but that is the scene in The Lion King. So I used to sit with my son and he used to watch these Disney movies, and just the scene in The Lion King where, he's sad, he saw his dad die, he's really not into being the king of the jungle. He wants to frolic around with Timon and Pumbaa, and he wants to sing Hakuna Matata. And he has that one night where he misses his dad, like a lot of us do, that don't have our parents anymore. And the monkey Rafiki goes up to him and says, "Your dad's there in the reflection." And so he's like, "He is?" And he goes, "Yeah, go look in the reflection." So Simba looks in the reflection of the water, and he sees himself. And the relatable story here is how many times our players look in the mirror, let's say with their bat even, but as themselves, they look in the mirror and they're not happy with what they see. So he has that moment and he looks in and he sees himself and he goes, "My dad's not there." So then the monkey says, "Look again, look again." He looks in and all of a sudden his dad appears to him. And that's when he gets the talking to. "You are my son. You are born to be the king of the jungle. take your place in the circle of life, you have forgotten who you are. And then the whole thing is remember who you are. So I tell our girls, our ancestors have already done the tough work here. So if we can remember who we are, what our bloodline was, try to imagine what 5, 6 generations ago, what our ancestors did for us to even be able to be here. That's just this moment of a young lady just remembering she doesn't have to be anything that she's not. She just has to be what she already is. And that can be a defining moment when you realize that I do have value, I am okay, I am beautiful, and I'm just dealing with tough stuff. So in the end, this is my inspiration that gets me through a day, and there's often times when I'm on the phone and I'm looking at it, it just kind of keeps me a reminder, but I pull these things at different times for a lot of the conversations that we have with families in here too, so it becomes a wall of influence, but it keeps me grounded. This is kind of my sanctuary wall. So there's a little bit about wall of influence.